All right, class, welcome back for Unit 2 of Purchasing. So this week we're going to be talking about supplier relations, requisitions, and the role of management. When talking about supplier relations, we're really getting back into those professional relationships that we started talking about last week. And the key point of those professional relationships is obviously the communication that you have with these representatives. Now, I know not everybody uses food delivery services like Cisco and Shamrock, and they may choose to go to cash and carry outlets like Sam's, Costco, or Restaurant Depot. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that if that's the best model of purchasing for your business. However, what I've noticed with those kinds of operations is that if a business is sending its employees over to pick up those kind of supplies, once or twice a week, it can really chew up a lot of time and energy, opposed to having those products delivered in. And that's a conversation for another time. But I did want to bring that up because one of your part of your project assignment is to come up with a purchasing system for your restaurant. For project assignment 2. And that cash and carry model is something we really didn't talk about last week in the lecture notes, so I wanted to bring that up briefly. If your purchasing system ends up being a hybrid of ride the market and cash and carry, or long-term contract cash carry, whatever the case may be for your concept, that's fine, but you would need to justify that in your paper, okay? And we'll talk about that more during our class meeting as well. All right, so supplier relations. So this is what we're going to be talking about, describing how an establishment communicates with vendors about its receiving and storage requirements. And it's not just receiving and storage. We need to communicate with them about product specifications. We're going to talk about that a little bit today after the lecture, okay? So supplier selection criteria, and these are things that we need to know as buyers or as purchasing agents, chefs, whatever the case is, whoever's ordering products in. So vendors who supply meat, poultry, and egg products must be inspected by the United States Department of Agriculture or USDA. And we're going to talk a lot more about the USDA later on in this semester. But those inspections are extremely important as to safe handling and transport and delivery of those meat, poultry, and egg products. All right. So vendors must be compliant also with applicable local, state, and federal laws. Vendors should be able to supply a list of references to prove they are reputable, and most of the large suppliers, even if it's a local produce company, like Quality Produce, they could definitely give you a list of references because they service hundreds of businesses in the region every day. So those references are a good point, especially when you're going through the selection process before you even really enter into that professional relationship. Vendors should be able to supply that list of references upon request. Okay, they're not going to offer it up. You would need to ask. So vendors who are inspected must have a HACCP program in place. And in summers past, for the purchasing class, I would take them on field trips over to Quality Produce, and they have a full HACCP program in place, and it's pretty impressive. Maybe I can call them and get a copy of that to post for you guys. So vendors who provide refrigerated or frozen products must have holding units that can maintain the required temperature, internal temperature of that product during holding and transport. Vendor delivery trucks must be able to maintain required product temperatures as well. And vendors must practice and must have practices and procedures in place to ensure that their personnel are following proper personal hygiene practices. And in this day and age of COVID, that's even more important because things have not slowed down for the delivery people. So next we're going to talk about supplier contracts. And not all restaurants or food service outlets choose to go into contract with their suppliers, they may just order products as needed. However, the favorable terms are provided if you enter into a contract with a purveyor or a supplier. They typically will freeze pricing or give you favorable pricing based upon what your needs are. So to review supplier contracts. So meet with your supplier and review your business needs with them and identify the criteria affecting those needs of delivery, storage, flow, and also payment as well. That's a really big one. So you want to go over all of that information. You want to give your supplier as much information as you can so that they can help your business. Identify acceptable delivery terms, and this is a really big one, and most places that I've worked at that are, say, open for lunch will not accept deliveries between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. because that's when your lunch rush is. And you don't want to be in the middle of a lunch rush where everybody's busy and have a delivery guy come and drop 30 cases at your back door because you need to address that immediately, or they sit on the floor for 2 hours while you're, handling your lunch rush. So that's acceptable delivery terms, and it may be no weekend deliveries, whatever the case is. So maybe you want them early in the morning, and a lot of times what these suppliers are doing is they have a key to your restaurant, and they go in at like 5 o'clock in the morning, and they will stock your groceries for you. And I know that's not ideal for every business, but I've worked at a place that did that, and it was pretty convenient. There were some issues from time to time, but it was nothing we couldn't handle. Also, convey the requirements for loading and unloading of vehicles, and a big one is where they park their vehicles. Oftentimes, especially in a city center or in shopping centers, you don't want them parking anywhere that would affect guest parking or emergency vehicles. So you need to let them know that where they can park, load, and unload their vehicle. Specify who can accept a delivery. You don't want just anyone being able to accept it and sign for a delivery. If you have untrained personnel that are accepting a delivery, how do they know if what you're getting is up to your quality standards, or if it's even the right product that was ordered? So you need to have trained personnel accepting deliveries, and you need to let the purveyors know who can accept those deliveries. And then finally, communicate your standards in writing when possible. And if you're entering into a contract, that's a really wise idea, because if you don't have it in writing and there's a contract, they can say, well, that's not part of the contract. Okay? So, moving on. Next, we're going to describe ways in which buyers and suppliers are obligated to each other. And this is just reinforcing that professional relationship that we keep talking about. And one of the ways that we're obligated to each other is in the ethical and professional standards that we keep. So let me take a minute here to spell out what ethics are. Ethics concern and deal with concepts of good and bad, right and wrong, moral duty, professional obligations, proper values, and personal conduct. And everybody should be on the same page when it comes to this. You don't want to deal with any shady kind of suppliers because if they're not reputable, they're not going to be there when you need them. So the need for ethical conduct is really important. In that professional relationship, your supplier has an obligation to their company, and you as the purchasing agent, chef, owner, whatever, have an obligation to your company. And where those two obligations intersect, that's that professional relationship, and everything needs to be handled in a very ethical and above board manner. So we do have obligations to our suppliers, just like they have obligations to us. And our obligation to them is to give them the information that they need in a timely manner. Say if your orders are due by 3 p.m. in the afternoon for the following day's deliveries, and you're constantly calling them at 5 and expecting that, you're not meeting that obligation. Or if you're paying late, you're not meeting that obligation. And if your supplier tells you, on the other hand, that you'll have your delivery before 11 a.m. and they're showing up at 4 in the afternoon, they're not meeting that obligation. Now, oftentimes, in the real world, these drivers run late or trucks break down and things happen, and your supplier should contact you and let you know instead of just keeping you on the hook and waiting. So that's how those obligations work. And especially for purchasing agents, which you guys need to think of yourselves as, is these there's what's known as conflicts of interest. We can't make backroom deals. We can't have under the table any kind of dealings like that with suppliers that our company does not know about. So we need to be honest and above board and straightforward at all times in all of these relationships. So that's a real key point to purchasing, because that is that you're handling your company's money and getting products in, and you don't want to put yourself in any kind of position where people would take a second look at you and say, is this person not acting in the best interest of our company? All right. Next, we're going to talk about the role of management. And when we're talking about management, one of the huge roles of management in the purchasing realm is putting the orders together. Now, if you're a chef in a restaurant, your line cooks or prep cooks may take an inventory and say, "Chef, we're running low on onions and flour." And so you take that information and you start putting your list together. From that list, we're going to do a couple of things. You can do an internal requisition if it's a large enough operation, which is what we kind of do with our commissary system at the school. An internal requisition is that piece of paper that you find taped to the cart for a lab. That piece of paper, the chef for that class submits that piece of paper in the beginning of the semester, so the lab assistants know to put that cart together at that time to deliver to that class when needed. That's how we know we have the right products for a particular class. That's an internal requisition because it goes from the chef of that class to the lab assistants. That doesn't go out to a larger company. Now, what the lab assistants will do with that is they will put those lists together and see how much onions and flour they need for the entire week, and then they will put together a purchase requisition or a purchase order, which is different from an internal requisition in that purchase requisition or purchase order goes from our facility or our program via the commissary lab assistants to whatever company they're buying from. So if they're accepting bids from Cisco, Shamrock, and US Foods, they will call all three of those all three of those companies and tell them exactly what they need for the week, and then that company will come back and say, well, these are all the prices we have for those products, and then we'll take those bids and try to get the best price on that. But we use that purchase requisition or purchase order to achieve those purchasing needs for the school. And that's based on those lists, right? Again, a purchase requisition or purchase order, and that terminology for our purposes is interchangeable, is that order that we're going to give to a supplier. Now, we may be using 3 different suppliers, and each of them gets a purchase order. That has nothing to do with taking bids. I didn't mean to confuse you with that. That purchase order is just the order list of the products that we're going to need. We bring that in, and from that point, it becomes an invoice. Once that product is delivered, that is the invoice. It's the list of all the products we bought, how much they cost, and then the total of how much we need to pay and when we need to pay it by. That's an invoice. And we're going to talk about purchase, ordering and receiving and storage procedures a little bit more later. But that's the difference between internal requisitions and a purchase requisition. Okay, and that's really management's job. You don't want your staff doing that, because then you're turning over control of the company's resources to people that aren't really trained to do it. Okay, so more roles of management and purchasing staff. And purchasing staff, just so you know, are usually management in larger food service organizations because, again, they do have some financial control. So identify appropriate management of food safety programs. That is a huge role of management, is maintaining food safety programs within an establishment, and also as it relates to purchasing. So these programs are referenced to in-house training and practices. So training, how you teach your people to follow standards, and the practices, what are those standards and how are they carried out in a daily basis. Please note that food safety programs from suppliers and their suppliers will come later on. Okay, we'll talk about that later on. So next, we're going to talk about determining management's role in providing appropriate training and supervision of food safety programs. So how does management ensure safe food service? Well, we have to have a plan. Whether it's a HACCP plan, like you studied in safety and sanitation, or it's through training of your personnel and in their daily job, right? So the first thing you want is, people trained on personal hygiene practices. You want them trained on safe food preparation, how to handle a knife. You want them trained on cleaning and sanitation, how to set up a dishwasher, how to set up a 3-pot sink. And people don't know that oftentimes walking into a job. So those items need to be trained on. And that's as it relates to safety and sanitation within a restaurant. And that is all management's responsibility. And you guys need to think of yourselves as managers and purchasing agents for the purposes of this class. So just keep in mind the principles of HACCP and proper rotation, especially as it relates to receiving ingredients from purveyors. So next we're going to talk about best practices used by management to ensure safe foods in the food service industry. So I want you guys to be thinking about times that you've witnessed good and bad food handling practices, whether you're at a restaurant, at home, or in a class at the college, and seen something that, hey, that's good. This person's doing the labeling right, wrapping everything properly, or on the other hand, when you're just like, ooh, I wouldn't eat there. So be thinking about that, and then also in the same light, be thinking about how those bad examples could be fixed, okay? And if we were in class, we would have a discussion about this, and during our class meeting tomorrow, I want to pose these questions for you guys, all right? So that's really it for the lecture notes. I'm looking forward to meeting with everybody this week, virtually via Blackboard. I posted a PowerPoint in the class about food handling, and let me pull that up really quickly so we can talk about that. And I'm just gonna look through it really quick and see if this is the one. Come on. Because there's some really simple basic stuff in there, and I want you guys to go through that, and we also need to talk real quickly about purchase specifications. So in the unit, I believe it is Audiovisual 2, and I posted it early, it's for next week, but I want you guys to take a look at it and be thinking about it. So receiving personnel talks about what receiving personnel need to do to maintain quality standards, effective receiving, fundamentals of receiving, and so on. I'll probably pull this up and post it, and we can talk about it next week as well, but probably during the class meeting. Okay, and then I also want to talk to you guys about purchase specifications or product specifications. And these are going to be a huge part of your master ingredient list. Why? Because when we buy groceries for a restaurant or products, ingredients, whatever you want to call that, when we buy these things for a restaurant, we're buying them in bulk. So if I buy ketchup for my house, I'm going to go find whatever bottle or brand I like. It's not too dissimilar with restaurants. However, I'm going to buy them in large quantities, and I'm really looking at the price as well. I may want one particular brand, but I may, look for a better price. If my customers find that acceptable, I might switch on them, but most people don't like to do that. So the product specifications are how that product is sold. Keep that in mind. It's really, really important, and we're going to talk a lot more about this in the coming weeks, but I just wanted to lay the groundwork for the conversation on product specifications, because when we buy onions for a restaurant, we're not going out and picking 2 or 3 onions from the produce section, putting them in a bag and weighing them at the register. We're probably buying a 50-pound sack of them, and we're probably buying more than one. And we may need to look at, are they yellow, are they red, what's the sizing on those? So those are all product specs or specifications. When we buy chicken, is it fresh, is it frozen, is it pieces, is it breasts only, are they boneless, skinless, are they bone-in? So all of those things need to be included, and when you're putting your master ingredient list together, don't get prices from Albertsons or Walmart. You need to go to a wholesaler. You can get them from Sam's, from Costco, from the Restaurant Depot out on Lee Trevino, or if you need more information, you can ask the lab assistants in the commissary, and they have price lists. I have some preliminary price lists, and I'll dig those up and get those posted for you this week, so that you can start looking at how products are coded, and with the specifications, it tells you exactly what they are and how they are sold. Typically in categories, like a dairy category, a produce category, things like that. But I just wanted to have that quick conversation with you guys about product specifications. Be looking at buying in bulk. If you start putting your master ingredient list with products as they're specified and priced from like Walmart or Albertsons, your menu prices, your food costs will be extremely high later on. So please don't start doing that. While you're putting that master ingredient list together, start looking at buying in bulk. There's also the economy cash and carry down in South El Paso too, that you can get some pricing on as well. All right, that's it for this set of lecture notes. I will post what I have for you, and I will hopefully see you guys in our weekly class meeting.